Hi everyone, I'm Elisha Krause, and this week on our Washington Examiner Newsmaker series, I am excited to welcome radio host, podcaster, successful author, and Fox News contributor, Dan Bongino. Dan and I discuss everything from the future of the conservative movement, potential candidates for president in 2024, and COVID lockdowns, along with Democrats' new push for gun reform. Dan, it's been a long time since we've spoken. It's an honor to have you on. Thank you for joining us on the Examiner series this week.
Yeah, happy to do it. I use a lot of the Examiner content in my show every day. So you got some good folks over there. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thanks. I'm sure our hardworking team over at WEX will appreciate that shout out from you, and giving you a huge shout out of congratulations. Speaking of your show, it's about to expand in a very big way soon. Can you tell the audience about that?
Yeah, well, obviously, we lost the Godfather, an icon. I mean, literally irreplaceable. There will never be another Rush Limbaugh again. Forget it. No one's ever going to be like Rush. Rush was practically every conservative in the country today. You, me, everyone knows something or believes something because we heard it on Rush at some point, right? So we lost Rush tragically way too soon. It was a really rough moment for all of us. I mean, I remember listening to his last show, not knowing it was his last show. I was shaving in my bathroom, getting ready for my afternoon portion of my work, thinking, gosh, he doesn't sound that great, but never realizing it would be the last moments of his radio career. And my gosh, I would have listened totally differently, if I just would have known. And yeah, to be offered some of the stations, I just want to be clear because there's always some confusion about this. Some of the stations he's on, because there are different, Premier was the radio, the company, Premier iHeart, that had Rush's show. But I work at Westwood. We carried his show on a good, healthy swath of our stations. I'm going to be taking over on those stations. And yeah, I mean, I don't even like the line big shoes to fill because you can't fill those. You can just hope to do honor to Rush's legacy, which is to bring good, solid, strong conservative ideas to millions of people. So I appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to start May 24th. And if you check out the website, bongino.com, closer, we'll give you a station finder and you can find out where to listen. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people, like you mentioned, that grew up listening to Rush. Then I had the honor of working for 7 years with Sean Hannity on the radio side. I make sure to tell people because I have a love of radio. And I think that sometimes people in TV and podcasting seem to poo-poo on it as if it's the ugly redheaded stepchild. But talk radio has been so impactful. Do you think that conservatives can make the foray further into streaming and television and movies and podcasting to have that type of impact on culture like they did in talk radio?
Well, we're already doing it. I mean, my investments in my business in tech, worked out great. I mean, outside of Parler, who was taken down, not by us, but was taken down by external, we were number one. I mean, when we were removed because we were a free speech platform, we were number one, not number one in our category in the App Store. We were number one in the world in every category. Also, my investments in Rumble, we've had tremendous growth in an alternative to YouTube. We're up something like 26-fold. So it's not just me either. You have Ben Shapiro at the Daily Wire with the Gina Carano partnership, which was just genius. I mean, candidly, I wish I would have thought of it first. I would have invested in a movie studio too. But we're not the only ones. You have other people out there. I think Mike Lindell's talking about doing a social media thing himself. So conservatives are getting smart. They're figuring it out. And even our own news outlets. You have the Washington Examiner, Washington Times, Daily Caller, Breitbart. I mean, we've got our own ecosystem now. The key to going forward, though, and this is critical, is we have to master the back end and the infrastructure because this is where they are. It's where Amazon destroyed Parler. We're back, but that's where they took out Parler, was on the infrastructure side. And I'm working on a project there, too.
So speaking of the future, I'm a millennial. Of course, the generation after me is referred to as Gen Zers. And earlier this week, actually, Washington Examiner contributor and Fox News contributor Kristen Soltis Anderson and I were joined by a couple of young men that are working with Gen Zers when it relates to the GOP and the future of the Republican Party. How do you think the conservative movement appeal to people of my generation and beyond?
Yeah, it's always been a mystery to me why it doesn't. I ran for office a few times, one time in a heavily Democratic district, and we won on election day. If you go back and look at the Maryland State Board of Elections, we won by 2,000 votes. Now, obviously, we lost the election. I'm not alleging any kind of impropriety. It was the absentee count that hurt us a bit. But we lost by a slim margin in an overwhelmingly Democratic district, and we got a ton of young voters. And one of the things I was always puzzled about is how the idea of liberty became like this, not sexy idea. Like liberty was always a cool thing, right? Like when I was in college, I had a white Ford Escort, and on the back, I had a bumper sticker that read "Question Authority," because I always thought that was the cool thing to do. Like, why submit to people who are, idiots if they're doing stupid things? But now all of a sudden it's weird. The whole appeal, the aura of liberty and freedom, everything's on its head now, right? Like it's cooler on a college campus and edgier to subordinate yourself to big government bureaucrats who know nothing about your life. So my point in this whole thing is, I don't think we need a different message. Liberty and freedom, real liberty and freedom, not the talking point, like economic liberty, school choice, the ability to pick your healthcare. That's real liberty, like touchable, feelable things. Like you can go into your doctor and you can walk in there and you can pick yourself, right? These are things you can do yourself. I don't think we need a new message. I think we need new messengers. We've just had old, stale politicians. And that's what, I really found attractive about the Trump campaign. He just did things differently. How else do you explain that a guy who's worth $1 billion on the Forbes list, who grew up in New York, wound up appealing to working class folks, in Wisconsin? How does that work? And the answer is it wasn't the message. Obviously, conservatism worked, or they wouldn't have voted for it. It was something in his message as the messenger in his that he delivered differently. And I think that's where we really have to focus our efforts.
So speaking of messengers, somebody that had been really talked about and praised by people in the conservative movement for a while now, especially with her handling of COVID, has been Governor Kristi Noem, who this week actually is under some fire for choosing to not sign into legislation a law there that people are calling it like the girls in sports bill, that was specifically stated that female sports need to remain female and male sports need to remain male, not allowing people who identify as a different gender to swap and go in a girls' locker room. She actually said that she ended up not signing this legislation because it would have had economic issues with her state and it was too much for her to take on alone. What is your response to her decision and conservatives' reaction to it?
Well, listen, I covered it on my show the other day. I think it was weak, the response. What I saw, at least on our Tucker Carlson interview, was, well, I didn't sign it, out of fear of being sued by the NCAA, which is strange because Margot Cleveland at The Federalist has a very good piece about what the NCAA rules actually are. And the reality is the NCAA, as far as I hasn't sued anyone, the ACLU has, but that's pretty normal. And, they sue everyone. They sue a lot of folks for a lot of things. I think they may have a lawsuit in Idaho about a similar bill, which is fine. That's what, they claim to be for civil liberties, so they can do what they want. But when you look at the NCAA rules, they don't prevent what Kristi Noem is alleging. It allows biological males under certain conditions to compete in women's events, the NCAA rules, but it doesn't actually stop what Kristi Noem's bill would have done, which would have made sure that it was only biological women against biological women. I know it sounds a little complicated. I encourage you to read Margot's article. She gives you the legal scoop on it, but she's kind of exaggerating, I think, the legal threat. Having said that, I'm hoping to have her on soon. I think her office agreed. I want to hear her side of it. If she really sincerely believes she's advancing the cause by doing it incrementally rather than one fell swoop and it'll get a better result at the end, I'm open to hearing it. I'm not an absolutist on these things. If she thinks she has a better strategy, I just haven't heard it yet. It sounded kind of weak to me.
All right, moving on to governors, including here in my state of California, where it looks like we're going to successfully recall Gavin Newsom. Then on the East Coast, you have leftist Governor Andrew Cuomo. There's this rising frustration with the way that Democratic governors have handled not only the lockdowns during COVID life, but, taxation, shuttering of small businesses, appealing to teachers' unions over mothers and students. Do you think that this could potentially help the GOP down ballot in the midterms?
I don't see how it doesn't. I had a friend, one visiting from New York, and then the next week, a business partner visiting from Canada. That in his portion of Canada is almost completely shut down. And he couldn't believe it. He said to me, he said, I'm not kidding. It's like leaving a prison. He couldn't believe how I live in Florida. I should have said that from the start. Florida's open. It's like outside of people who, choose to wear masks, and there's no statewide mask mandate here either. You wouldn't even know anything happened in Florida. Florida, the business is booming. You can't buy a house in Florida to save your life. I mean, houses like doubled in value here in Florida. Then I had a friend from New York and some family come down, and likewise they can't just process the difference between the two places. And I think, listen, voters aren't stupid, but despite politicians' protestations otherwise, that voters are stupid because that's what they think. That's why they're politicians and not, working folks like us. It's amazing how the worst, like 535 people in America too, all wound up in the same place in Capitol Hill with the same job. It's just crazy. Like, how did we not get better people? But people aren't dumb. And they're going to start figuring it out. And they're going to be like, well, Florida had a bit of a rough run with COVID too. Anyone who denies that is crazy. But it was certainly no rougher than New York. It wasn't even close to New York. And it was no rougher really than California in many metrics. And yet these New York and California, where I'm sorry you live there. That's a shame. I like you. I didn't know you lived in California. It's terrible. But I'm really sorry about that because they wiped out all these people's jobs, futures, hope, kids' years of education for what? I mean, the exact same result, or in New York's case, or worse than what we had in Florida. I mean, really speaks to the poor nature of how they deliberate on these things. Like who sat around a table and said, this is a good idea. Let's kick the kids out of school and shut down the businesses because we're really sure this will work. Like who agreed to that? Did they look at any other examples? The answer is most likely no. Of course they didn't.
So our last topic for this interview today, and I'd love to have you back sometime because I love your opinion on all these things. I know our audience does as well, is of course the two horrific shootings that have occurred in the last few days, one in Atlanta and then one, of course, in Boulder, Colorado. Seems to have enlivened Democrats, the Biden administration, and even the media's love of discussing and bringing up gun control legislation. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, listen, obviously these are... we've got people who died. I mean, families will never see them again. Their last breaths were taken. Holidays will be without them. They did nothing wrong. They showed up in a supermarket to work or to go buy groceries and, never left. Thinking about it's tough. These are really tragic situations. What makes them even more tragic is you would think as a country, we'd be able to come together during these moments and be able to kind of hotwash what happened, right? And figure out a way to stop this stuff without making every single thing a political narrative in the minutes. But that's what Democrats do, and that's the world we live in. I'm not suggesting Republicans don't make political hay out of things as well. But I can tell you honestly, listening to my show, it's all out there. My shows are all recorded on SoundCloud and Apple, whatever. You can hear them. We try to let these things just kind of simmer down a little bit first and let victims grieve, before having to jump in a political fight. Unfortunately, Democrats have pushed us into these things constantly. And it's no different with these two just unbelievable tragedies. These two incidents have already become about racial grievances and gun control. By the way, there's zero evidence, big donut, zero evidence at all that either of these shootings were motivated by race. So why that's being brought into this is only to divide people, right? I mean, if you had evidence, I'd hear it out. So of course, I mean, if these were motivated by race and we knew it, if this was some white supremacist or someone from Black Lives Matter on the opposite side, and we knew this was racially motivated, that's definitely a topic of conversation. How did it happen? How do we stop that in the future? We have no evidence of that at all. None. And yet the Democrats are doing what they always do, dividing us, and made this all about race already. And then secondly, they made it about gun control, which is really, again, incredible because we have no evidence yet, or we don't have enough evidence to show how they got the gun. We don't know any of that. And it's really a shame because people like me have done nothing wrong, and why I should have to forfeit my access to a firearm to defend my family because some maniac decided to shoot up a massage parlor or a grocery store I don't know how that's even logical, but again, Democrats are all about narratives. They're not about finding solutions to problems.
And one of those Democratic narratives that we hear, even in President Biden's statement, he released a statement talking about how we need to do this now. We cannot wait a moment longer because if it saves one life, then we need to have gun reform. I think that maybe other people could argue, well, that if it saves one life, we should end lockdowns, considering the long-term emotional, educational damage to children, the increase in suicides, depression, anxiety, obesity, etc. What do you say to Democrats when they say to you, well, don't you care about saving lives?
I said, well, we could save millions by stopping abortion. And they have no interest in doing that at all. It's kind of weird, right? I mean, that's what we're doing, right? It's alive. If it weren't alive, you wouldn't have to abort it. That's what you're doing. So just kind of strange how they're so interested in saving one life, but when millions of lives are snuffed out, they think this is just great public policy. So I'll take a hard pass on the Democrats' views on life. It's kind of BS. I don't think they actually believe that. This is obviously a political thing. And listen, that's the logic there is silly. What they're asserting is that somehow there is a correlation or causal relationship between more guns equaling more crime, right? That's what they're saying or suggesting. So therefore, they believe legislation which would result in less guns would equal less crime. I'm having to think like a Democrat for a minute because I'm assuming that's what they tell you. The problem is there's no evidence of that at all. As a matter of fact, the correlation goes in the opposite direction. Both more guns and more guns per person have equated to dramatic drops in gun homicide and gun homicide per person. So again, I don't, the Democrats don't seem to care about life when it comes to abortion. So hard pass on their opinion on life. But secondly, even the data they're supposedly using to come to this conclusion that they're saving lives points in the opposite direction. So they're just making that up. I covered that on my show today on the Wednesday show. How they're just making it up. The data is clear as day because they just they want you to rely on government for your protection. It's critical to them.
All right. My final question to you, sir, is obviously you have had a history of a cancer fight, and I think a lot of the audience is concerned about your health and hopes that you're doing well. Where are you in your lifelong battle with cancer?
Yeah, it's the toughest fight I've had yet. So I had surgery, finished my chemotherapy, and then finished radiation with the great people at MD Anderson, and my local doctor here is fantastic. So, there's always, unfortunately, you're never really cured. So I had some scares with my lungs, but that turned out, hopefully, knock on wood, to be okay. I'll find out May 3rd. But things look good. So, it's a struggle. But I will say this, of all the forms of cancer to get, I had a very treatable one. Thank the Lord. And I'm not using his name in vain. I mean that. I had a very treatable one. So there are people out there. I mean, I got thousands of emails after announcing on my show I had been diagnosed with cancer from people who were in far, far worse shape than me, who were diagnosed with stage 4 lung, pancreatic, and others. So, God bless them all in the fight. And I know it sounds crazy to say I've been lucky. Like, lucky, you diagnosed with cancer at 46. No, I have. I mean it. It was luck. It really was that they got it early, and that God has blessed us with such a prosperous country with such smart people in medicine that they can, fix that problem. I thank God every day I was born in America. I don't have to sit on waiting lines to get into a hospital.
Dan, thank you so much for your time, sir, and we look forward to having you back in the future.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.